As you may know, this summer I'm spending 2 months in France because it is just too hot in Arizona. It's like 45 degrees or 115 degrees in the summer. And so we like to escape for a couple months. This year we're in France. And as such, being in Europe, today I wanted to talk about the top European AI deals that have happened this year, which companies working with AI have raised the most money, what they're doing. A lot of times I talk about American companies. California obviously churns out the most software and tech companies, and with AI, this hasn't been much different. But I have found there's some incredible companies all around the world. So trying to highlight a few more of those. And I think that some of these will be really interesting to you. I want to break down who the top players are in Europe, how much they've raised, and what they're doing. Before I get into all of that, I wanted to let you know, you may have heard recently, I released a podcast course, how to grow, build, and scale a podcast. And this week only, I'm trying to get more reviews and testimonials for the course of people that are doing incredible things. So this week only, if you are a listener of the AI Chat podcast, I'm going to give you, with the code AI Chat, an 80% discount. Normally, this is a $300 course. I'm going to give an 80% discount with the discount code AI Chat. You can get a link to the course in the show notes as well as the discount code. I would love to have you take the course. And if you're going to do this and you're going to take the discount, make sure, please leave a review and a testimonial of the course. This is really what I'm going for. So anyways, the link is in the show notes. You can get that. Let's dive into the top European AI companies. So the one that I wanted to highlight first, because I think that Europe is actually not super far behind the USA. So in the US, as far as AI companies goes, there's been about 30 deals that are over $100 million so far this year. So obviously, US is leading in that, but Europe is not too far behind. According to Crunchbase, which is where you can get, where companies are located and how much they're raising. According to their latest report out of Europe, there have been 14 investments over $100 million into AI companies. And one of them actually got 2 investment rounds. So I'm sure you might be able to guess who that is. But I think this is interesting. Cumulatively, according to PitchBook, they put out data on all this kind of stuff. They have shown that there's been more than 1,700 funding rounds for AI startups in Europe so far this year. And then 14 of them were over $100 million. So who are the big players? Who's, pulling in the big money? I think one other interesting thing I wanted to say as well is a lot of them have been here in France. So that is very interesting to me. I think it's one of the top places in Europe for tech right now. And specifically, I think AI, they're doing quite well there. So I think a lot of that, I was recently talking to someone here about this, and they were saying that a lot of it has to do with the government here giving a lot of grants, giving a lot of tax breaks to technology and AI companies. So it seems to be pretty popular. Anyways, it's pretty interesting. So who's the number one company? So the biggest funding round out of Europe this year was Wave. So Wave raised $1 billion, $1.05 billion. They are essentially going to be competing with Tesla, General Motors, Intel, and Alphabet. And they're going to be doing self-driving. So back in May, it's based out of Cambridge, so out of the UK. But they closed this round, and they're really trying to double down on what they currently have going in their autonomous driver technology. This is the biggest deal in the region. It's really similar to Intel's Mobileye. So you have Wave, who is currently selling its technology to a bunch of different car makers and OEMs. So they're not actually making their own vehicle like Tesla is, but they just essentially are licensing out their software to other car companies to be able to use to have self-driving. So unlike a bunch of different other self-driving companies, they've kind of moved away from having their reliance on LiDAR technology. They're rolling out a bunch of different services. This is their CEO, Alex Kendall. And they said, quote, 7 years ago, we started the company to go build an embodied AI. We've been heads down building technology, and what happened last year was everything really started to work. In this $1 billion investment round that they pulled in, there's essentially it was SoftBank, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and then Meta's head of AI, Yann LeCun, who is from France. So, I'm sure he likes to support the European startups. And yeah, they essentially put together this round. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Wave is able to do, if they're able to really come up with a competitor against Waymo from Google and against Tesla. Those are kind of the two leaders from what I've seen up to this point. Okay, the second company I want to talk about is Mistral. You probably heard me talk about Mistral a ton. I think this is the most known because it's just literally a ChatGPT competitor. It's based out of Paris. They raised 2 rounds. The first was 431 million, and the second was 650 million. So they've actually technically raised more than Waze, but they did it in 2 rounds, so it kind of got broken up. But yeah, they've raised, $1.8 billion or $1.08 billion. One thing that I think is interesting, they actually did their seed round with $130 million. So they have just been on an absolute tear raising money. This year, they've raised over $1 billion. Some are saying that they're currently still working on raising even more. So yeah, definitely a wild company. They really focused on open source when they first launched. That's what a lot of people loved about Mistral, was it was a ChatGPT competitor, but it was open source. Now it seems like they're doing some things that are more closed source. So it'll be interesting to see if they pull a kind of like a bait and switch that OpenAI did and do some closed source. So who's giving them money? Where are they getting billions of dollars to compete with ChatGPT in what feels like a pretty frothy market? They so far have had backers from DST, Andreessen Horowitz, Lightspeed Venture Partners, Microsoft, Salesforce, BNP Paribas. So, that's a bank here in Paris, CMA, CGM, and General Catalyst. So really all of the top VCs, some local banks here in France. Obviously pretty big banks. Either way, I believe they're pretty global. But this is really interesting, and I'm very bullish on Mistral. I think it's a really interesting company. Huge fan. The third company I want to talk about is Helsing. Helsing has raised $484 million this year. I think we're seeing a bigger growing trend right now in defense and technology companies warming up to kind of the defense sector. So really, I think what led the charge on all of this is Palmer Luckey. When he started Anduril, he left Facebook, started Anduril. He got a lot of flack because it's a missile, autonomous jet, drone, defense, just working with the government, making bombs and weapons, essentially. This was very controversial. A lot of people gave him a lot of flack. I've listened to him talk about it, and he essentially said, it's important that someone's building advanced systems so that, foreign adversaries, he lives in the United States, he says, so that foreign adversaries of the United States aren't building them. So I think that's interesting. And to be honest, yeah, I think it's a good point. Whatever country you're from, you want your military probably in your country to have the best weapons to essentially defend itself. So anyways, I feel like he kind of led the charge on that. Since then, now we've had Helsing, who's raised almost $500 million. And then we also had Y Combinator, right? The most famous incubator, kind of startup incubator out of California. I believe it made one of its first investments in a defense company making cruise missiles recently, which is something that they traditionally have never invested in any sort of weapon system. So it seems like the market is shifting in that way. And could be a few catalysts. I think one of the big catalysts for this was the Ukraine war. A lot of people realized that, countries literally inside of Europe were being invaded. They needed advanced weapon systems. Obviously, in Ukraine, it's been a massive struggle fighting against Russia. And had they had better weapons, maybe things would have been better. So it seems like this company out of Europe now is trying to help, and that's probably been a bit of a catalyst for them to be able to raise this money. Helsing was founded in Germany, and it essentially is, kind of one of these homegrown European defense systems. They're focusing primarily on software, so they don't have actual, bombs, unlike, or I guess like jets or like things like that, like you would see from Anduril or anything. But they're software, and they're building AI services that essentially link up and work with legacy infrastructure to help make the defense systems better. So it's helping to make their weapon capabilities improved. It's giving better battle analytics and decision making, kind of similar to what you see with other companies based out of the US that have kind of these battle analytics or analysis and stuff like that. So it's all software. They said that Ukraine and Russia has been a big point of growth for them. They said, quote, Ukraine has used technology for its defense against the full-scale Russian invasion, and I think us being able to help there and deploy our technology and execute the mission we had set out 3.5 years ago to use AI to protect our democracies has been a big driver for us. So that's their co-chief executive officer. And I think essentially with this almost $500 million that they just raised in July, it's probably going to move into hardware, which I think is quite interesting. As far as who their actual investors go, you have General Catalyst, Prima Materia, Elad Gil, you have Accel, you have Saab, you have Lightspeed, Plural, and Grenoble. So a bunch of big American venture capital firms that typically did not invest in defense are now getting involved with this as well. So very interesting. The next company I want to tell you about is Poolside. Poolside has just raised $400 million. And they're actually a company that is focused on building AI tools for developers. Now, there's a whole bunch of kind of companies obviously building AI tools for developers. Something that seems to happen a lot with these is that they get great product market fit. There's developers love these tools. Poolside is no exception. So what I do think, though, is an exception and how they're actually been able to raise this when it seems like a bit of a crowded field is their CEO, Jason Warner. He was actually the CTO over at GitHub. And he also led engineering for Heroku and Canonical. And so the other co-founder is the CEO, Iso Kant, who was previously at Athenia, which built a whole bunch of tools for developers to kind of help them optimize how they were working and stuff like that. So I think that the reason they were able to raise so much money is because their leadership team is very solid and has a lot of experience. And they're based out of Paris, which I think is interesting. There's a bunch of AI startups in Europe based out of Paris. So their early backers that were kind of getting them started was BCV. And then they had London's Airsteel, Abstraction, Scribble Ventures, New Wave, First, which is from France. And they also had BPI France, Felicius, Point9, and Redpoint. So this is actually less of the big American VCs. This feels more like they had a lot of European VCs in here, which I think is interesting, supporting the system. But the latest $400 million round that they just raised is going to be led by BCV and DST. So interesting and definitely a company to keep your eyes on. The next one I want to talk about is DeepL. DeepL has just raised $320 million. There's a bunch of different companies and players, Google, Microsoft, that are kind of offering text translation and writing tools. DeepL is based in Germany, and they essentially are just saying they believe that their AI approach is better than anyone else. So they're taking a bit of a different focus as well. They're not going straight to consumers for it. They're more of a B2B and enterprise play in kind of these text translation writing tools. And what's interesting to me about them, it's like, anyone could say they have this sort of tool, and depending the valuation of the company would definitely be very dependent. What's impressive to me is they currently have over 100,000 business customers. They just announced this $320 million round in May. And so I think that they're going to be scaling that number pretty aggressively. I'm excited to see what happens. To be honest, I love all of the competition in the market. So who invested? It was Iconic Growth, Teachers Venture Growth, IPV, Atomico, and WIL. I'll put money into this. Again, less of the big American VCs that you're kind of like familiar with seeing. For the next three that I'm going to bring up, they're a little bit less of the headliners that you may know, but I do think they're interesting and they qualify for this. The first one is called H. So the last two companies I want to talk about, Flow Health. Flow Health raised $200 million. They're not necessarily like they don't have any sort of wearable. They're just a hardware device. They're for essentially women's health, fertility, and period tracking. I know my wife has used this app in the past before and is a big fan of it. It's quite old. I've seen this thing 7 or 8 years ago. And so, yeah, this is not a very new company. They just passed $1 billion valuation when they raised this $200 million. It's very popular. They do some AI, I think some AI sort of guessing and estimation stuff, but it doesn't feel like a very AI company. I think it's AI enabled, but I brought it up because it's based in London. Yeah, they have over 380 million users, which is absolutely insane. That's very, very impressive. And they have 70 million monthly active users. So I think in reality, the 70 million is probably their user base, because I'm sure, my wife is included in the 380 million users. I don't think she uses it anymore. But so probably 70 million active users is really where they're at least monthly active users. So they've got a lot of users. That's awesome. They've raised a lot of money. I'll be curious to see what they do. The last one I want to bring up is Pigment. Pigment is another company based in France, based in Paris. They've raised $145 million. They're an enterprise software company. Specifically, they kind of focus on enterprise resource planning for financial teams. So they're not necessarily an AI startup per se, but they do use a lot of AI tools and functionality to help improve in their enterprise resources and finance planning. So it's kind of a one I wanted to throw in there, and I've been impressed that they were able to raise $145 million. They did that earlier this year, and they did that at a valuation of $780 million. So a great company. If you enjoyed the episode today, if you learned anything new about any of these companies based in Europe and what is going on, I would really appreciate it if you could write a review for the podcast. If you are interested in growing your own AI startup or your own AI side hustle, I would love for you to join the AI Hustle School community. It's $25 a month. We'll probably bump it up to $50 a month, but this week you're able to get in for $25 a month. The school community is an awesome way to learn. We release exclusive videos every single week on different side hustles, ways to make money using AI. It's an amazing community, a lot of resources. The link is also in the description. If you're interested in that, we'd love to have you as part of it. Hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.